Great. Greetings. This is Player Talk, bringing you another episode of the Community Crafted podcast. My name is Vlashko, co-founder of Casually Addicted, World's Adrift Reddit mod, and that annoying survey guy.
My name is Snappy Texas. I am a YouTube video maker for World's Adrift videos. I'm a member of the Beavers, and recently I just lost a ship in combat, and that kind of feels good. It's been a long time since that happened.
Wait, you mean you can lose ships to something other than bugs?
Yeah, believe it or not.
This is Shade. I've been around a bit. You might know me from the forum or from Discord.
I'm Harms, co-founder and captain of Casually Addicted, Hardcore Pirate, and Discord Griefer.
I'm Grave. I am a notorious solo player, a giant advocate of PvE, and I can say that I have never lost a ship to combat. In fact, I've never lost a ship that wasn't completely intentional.
Hi, my name is Doc Freeman. I am the author of the World's Adrift design documents, and I'm an advocate for properly working hybrid servers.
Well, to get started, thank you very much, Bossa, for showing that you listened in the most recent podcast. It really means a lot to all of us who have been involved. And we would like to talk about the wipe, that when is the best time to announce a wipe to properly keep people testing stuff on the PTS and involved in the game, and whether or not the wipe was announced too early this time around.
So I definitely think the wipe was announced a bit too early. And I know they don't want to blindside people with it because then that feels bad too. But on the other hand, it was announced the wipe's on 27. 26 isn't even launched yet. So, bare minimum, it feels like 27 would come early October, unless, maybe they have way more done than we think they do. And it kind of feels bad when people feel there's a wipe coming for so long. You get this really long period of stagnation. And I feel like maybe a 1 to 2 weeks is all you really need, especially in an early access game, because players should know saves get wiped all the time in early access titles.
I'm not 100% sure we can blame the wipe announcement for the current drop in player base.
Oh, true.
I think at this point we need a wipe much sooner than we're getting. But I'm not sure there's too much of an argument, in my opinion, as to the wipe being any sort of relevance to that.
I'm actually part of a few Discords where World Adrift was played. The people on those Discords, while they are still active for other games, they heard about the wipe, and their response was less than happy. And I understand. I understand why. They have good engines, what have you, and they're going to lose those things. And they go, well, now I got to go get that all again. Was it announced too early? I think so, especially with 26 not even out yet. Yeah, it was definitely announced too early. A lot of people just kind of put their toys away and went home because why do anything? There's no point.
Well, that's a weird stance to take for a game that doesn't really have much of an end game. You get a grind again.
I think for more casual players where they don't play as much as us, to them, that's a lot of effort they put in for someone who's only played 50 hours, right? You spent 15 hours on a ship, man, that feels like a lot,
But compared to an MMO, that's really not a lot of time.
True, I'm just trying to explain how they may feel that way.
Yeah.
Reception.
Yeah, that's probably how they feel, and especially me. I am a casual player. I am, and I'm okay with the wipe. I welcome the wipe, and I mean I'm going to be losing. I've got a fully upgraded core. I know how to make every single core piece, and that to I've found out from a lot of players that that's kind of a big deal that you can do that all on your own. That's pretty great. I'm gonna have to start all over. All right, well that's fine. I'll do it. I'll take it.
In this case, I don't know that the studio had a whole lot of choice. Could have been done maybe a little differently on the timing, but as soon as they announced the hybrid server, it was a given that there was going to be a wipe. It came up in the text chat of that stream, because people who've been around for a while know that if they're going to be doing a server shakeup like that, it usually means there's going to be a wipe. So they couldn't make one announcement without making the other.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think you could have said, but we don't know the timing yet. And then, if there's one thing I don't want them to say too early and don't give us info on, it's wipes too early. Like, they withhold information a lot of other times for reasons due to player perception, etc. In this case, I think that would have been one of the correct times to do that.
There.
I don't know. More waiting is. We know it's coming. I've known it's coming. I mean, I don't have any inside information, but with the big changes coming up, it's obvious that it's going to be coming. I'm glad that they announced those changes so we know as far ahead as possible. So I'm not really 100% sure that they could have announced those without announcing a wipe.
Right. Well, while, despite, how I feel about the wipe, it has been announced. So, because, we're kind of a whole podcast crew here, we're kind of waiting for things to get done by Vasa, and their last podcast didn't tell us too much about. We know most of the stuff they're working on. We're now just in the waiting seat. So, I think would be a great time. I kind of want to talk about PvP balance and topics along that line. I think a good first topic, especially with some of our PvE players here, would be crew sizes, because we have some notorious solo players here, and crew size is huge for them, right? Like, how impactful can they be as a solo versus a crew? And I would love to hear their insight on how they feel PvP balance and surviving versus crew sizes should be done.
All right.
This one is tricky. How do you balance a crew size? Sure, you could limit the crew number, but that doesn't limit the amount of people that can work together.
It could be something similar to, for instance, like other games where, a party size. There's a party size and then one for a larger group, like a raid size.
Well,
So,
go ahead.
So to give an example of this, so I'm part of the Beavers, and we're known for being a very, very big crew. We have close to 30 people, I think, right now that are considered Beavers, and we have multiple crews within the umbrella Beaver group, right? So the crew that I'm a part of, we're called the Damned. We have our own focus on things. We love to PvP. We have like 6 to 8 people on when we're all active, usually, and then a lot of times we'll have other crews that are just as many people as us on different ships doing their own things. The way that we used to run was basically just all create spawners, put them on a cruise ship, and just have this massive, massive group on a big ship with a ton of cannons. We could have people repairing, people on cannons, people flying, and people boarding all at the same time without any worry. Now what we do is primarily multi-ship combat if it's a really good fight. So we'll have multiple crews in the battle. We may, once alliances are fully implemented, we may have our own little sub-alliances. We already, we've claimed a bunch of alliance names for ourselves already, and we may do it that way so that we can recognize, our own crews. We can recognize the other ships that are Beaver ships, and then we can go from there. Some of the proposed changes that people have thought about when it comes to trying to balance crew sizes is things like making revivers really heavy, right? So in the case of multi-chip combat, that wouldn't really work. we're still, I would argue, more effective in multi-ship combat than we ever were on one big ship. So I really don't know. I don't know if it's even possible.
Well, if I may, I think one way to go about it, the easiest way I feel that would be to go about it would be that you can only have 4 revivers per frame.
So
5, I think, would be the minimum, in my opinion.
Well,
So-
we can argue about the number. It's more the concept.
So the idea of limiting revivers per frame, I'm not a big fan of like just an arbitrary limit because I like the idea of this big 10-man cruise ship. What bothers me is that, especially after the splash changes and how strong repairing is, having multiple crew members than the other crew is so strong. Before the splash changes, so my bias, I'll be upfront. I run a very small crew, generally 3 to 4 at most. We could do very, very well against a larger crew because it was more about who landed the most shots and was, doing the effective damage. Because you were gonna usually out DPS any repairing for the most part. But now that they've switched the splash, because we simply do not have the members to man all the guns we need, we cannot sink anybody. And in my opinion, a lot of players tend to play in smaller groups, right? Most people aren't part of either a mega alliance like the Beavers, and most people don't run like a 10-man, anywhere between 6 and 10-man crews. You have that small group of friends you play with. So it's frustrating to me that even if we're flying really well, we're landing a ton of shots, that we just simply don't have the firepower anymore to really take down these crews.
So, a thing about it is, even if you had a ship that, say, only let there be, and this is again an arbitrary number I'm throwing out, although I am throwing this number out for a reason. If you had 4 people that could be on the ship actively with revivers, that doesn't stop the ship from having 10 people on it, 20 people on it. It just means that those people not registered to it can't respawn at it. Therefore, is the risk of being that larger ship manned by that big of a crew. If somebody dies, they go back to wherever it is their reviver is. And that brings in the idea of you needing support ships that carry those revivers either alongside the bigger ship or tucked away somewhere. And if you lose those people, if they die, you've got to go back for them.
I think it's because the reviver is also tied to being able to get on and off cannons easily. Like in that point, you'd have to add, okay, can we add permissions where even if someone doesn't have a reviver on a ship, because they're a part of your alliance, they can grab a cannon. You get into all these permission systems and it gets really messy. And that's why I would shy away from that a little bit, in my opinion.
We're also running into actually a very significant design issue with this game. Start to finish, no matter how you feel about the decisions the studio has made, one of the things that they've been really adamant about sticking with is that they're trying not to introduce artificial rules or artificial seeming rules. So they're trying to balance gameplay issues with how those gameplay elements work with and against each other, rather than just saying, okay, crews are too large, we're going to say revivers, you can only have so many of them. To me, that feels like a Band-Aid fix. It might come down to doing things that way because they have to, but it seems to me like what they try first to say, okay, well, if small crews are no longer as effective as they were, let's see if we can find a middle ground with cannon splash damage.
I just don't see any of that stopping me from having 8 ships all rolling together.
It doesn't.
I don't think people have it. For me, when I talk about crew sizes, I'm not as concerned with 8 ships rolling up on me. I expect 8 ships to sink me. What if I'm like one ship, right? Like one ship should not usually be able to take on 8 ships. Like that just shouldn't happen. But what to me is like when people talk about like making revivers heavier, it's that oftentimes an alliance, like say the Beavers or the Bork, etc., they will have multiple accounts and have revivers, like 15 revivers on all their ships. So at any point, everybody can teleport onto an alt and log on to that ship rather than having to bring all those ships to one area.
That's
Right.
true.
Not just everyone getting to that ship, but a much smaller portion of that total population, which might be available at that moment. Might be only 3 or 4 people on the ship, but it depending on who can be online.
Yeah, and it allows them just to get everybody there instantly, right? And that's more the problem I have with ships with 12 revivers, and they can just instantly have massive crews.
And now I brought up the 4 reviver thing for a reason. The idea of making a crew size cut down, make it smaller, is actually a form of aiding the smaller ship, because if you're being chased down and there's less DPS being thrown your way, then you have a better chance at escape.
So for me, I think an indirect way to that, people always say, like, well, what will making revivers heavier really do? And to me, that means that if you could still, it doesn't limit the player. If I want to have a battleship with all 20 of my alliance's revivers on it, I can do that, but it's going to be slow. And if you're a solo player, you should outrun that ship. Barring you absolutely beating up on a newbie ship, which won't even happen on the hybrid server anymore, most likely, is that, that way, sure, you can still do this. You can have these big crews, but that's a warship, and you can escape that ship. So it feels way better for the player. Now, if they're in multiple, like they have 6 scout ships with 3 rapid fire guns, you are going to get shot down anyway, and I don't think any game design decision will ever change that.
One issue I do see with adding weight to the revivers is that it will be a lot more difficult for new players who are starting out with their friends to get everyone together, throw a bunch of revivers on the ship, and go out doing
That's
stuff
true.
together.
That's true.
Because Sky Core limit, obviously.
How would you feel if the initial Sky Core lifted, say, and keep in mind, we're trying to limit the bigger crews here, right? So let's say, I think, how much does a reviver weigh now? Around 20, 15 to 20, depending on your materials.
Yes.
Let's say you even, I don't know, doubled it. And then maybe you added, so the default Sky Core now does 1200. I do not think that would break the vast majority of new players' progression, because you could still have a ship that flies in tier 1 with 6 or some players. And after that, yeah, your first ship might have to be split into 2. If you have a 10-man group of friends, you might have to make 2 ships at first. But I think that's okay.
That's fine. I mean, who wouldn't? I don't know a single one of my friends that wouldn't play this game. And if I built a ship, I know for a fact most of them wouldn't want to crew it. They'd want to build their own, because we all have ideas. We're a creative bunch. And well, it's cool to be a crew on somebody's ship. The majority really does enjoy that creative element. I know there are people out there who are hardcore gunners. I got a friend who all he does is gun. That's his jam. He's really creative, but he likes somebody else being the pilot so he can do the shooty bang bang. And when it comes to it, if you told people, yeah, you're only going to be able to have like 4 people on ship because either that's the limitation or the things are too heavy, whatever rule you want to put in. If you had 10 players on and they went, oh, well, we can only do this many on ship. All right, well, let's make a second ship and they'll fly side by side. I feel like even that experience in itself might be even cooler to them because they've got this kind of mini fleet going, and that might even feel cooler.
Since I
Yeah.
Snappy?
Yeah. I was just gonna agree with Grave, and I think that particularly kind of mid game when you're moving, it could really encouraging people to kind of separate out, even if they're flying together, even if they're doing the same things and playing as a group. Encouraging people to do that could really make for some interesting gameplay, particularly when it comes to like Stormwall and Sandwall, where now all of a sudden there's something that you do have to get past where it may not be the best decision to go it alone, where you have to, decide like kind of who out of this group of four, say, with the four different ships, you kind of have to, get behind each other and decide like, okay, well, these are the two ships that we're going to take through, or this is the one that we're all going to group up on so that we can make it past that sand wall. I think it could definitely make for some interesting and pretty meaningful gameplay in that regard.
There's sorry, just real quick. I didn't want to lose the thought because it popped in my head, and I'm old. The thing about a lot of ships as a solo player. So I've got one other person who's attached to my ship. One guy who like never logs in. That's why I don't worry about it. The thought of somebody logs in, takes your ship for a joyride because they're bound to it, and you have to log on, and they've got to go. So about the ship, and then you have to hear the long story of how all the work you did is now gone because that dude logged in, that one dude out of like 15, and he decided he was going to go on a thing. If that isn't really an option because they can't have that many revivers bound to the ship, then it's a much smaller pool that can take that ship for a ride. And that means that you can be a little more assured that when you play, you can play with your friends or who might be in command of that ship while you're not online.
So I think that can, something like Reviver White indirectly solves that, as it's going to be a rare amount to have all those revivers on the ship, simply because you're not going to want to have all that excess weight. And I always think about a player is a resource, just like a cannon, just like an engine, except a player is more valuable than any cannon you could ever have. A player can board, a player can repair, a player gets to shoot a cannon. Like a reviver, weight to resource value is way more valuable than everything else, yet weighs almost nothing. I'm not saying a reviver should weigh as much as a cannon, because that's absurd. But it is a little silly how on one ship the value a reviver gives compared to the other resources. And I think to your point, Grave, that you don't want people logging in. I think the way to solve that would we really need a robust version of permission systems for logging in Alliance big cruise ships.
So on that note, it's not really on the topic list, but I think it fits pretty well with this conversation. In the past, Bossa have talked a decent bit about crew revivers. If something like that were to be implemented, how do you think it would change the situation?
I think the crew reviver's weight would have to be dynamic with the people registered to it, so you can't just log in armies, because that incentivizes the person who pays for more accounts and can have more alts on more ships, can teleport around and be on whatever ship they need to on their alliance like that.
I think it means that solo players can have their bank and their farming ship on the same account. I am so looking forward to that.
I actually have a very big feeling about bank ships and everything, and it's pretty counter to probably what everybody feels, and I'm fine being on an island on this one. And I'll get into it if you guys want me to, but right now I want to stay on topic.
Yeah. Which actually, we started to touch on this subject a little bit, and I would like to add something to it as well, which is PvP balance and how difficult should it be to sink a ship, but also to tie into that, how difficult should it be to pass through walls?
Yeah, so for me, we talk about how difficult should it be to sink a ship. I think before the splash changes, a ship, especially one if you're fighting like a high tier versus a low tier, one good volley could cripple that ship, and that was a little too cruel. I remember rolling up on people with my 3-4 man crew, and they're flying slowly through the air or something. They're just, they're having a good time, and we roll up and they have lost 3 engines. They're offside. One wing's about to fall off, and that was one pass, right? Our guns just overheated. But now it's the other way, where you just lay into a ship. You feel like they must be on fire, like they must be going down, and they just putter away. And that's going to be a huge problem, especially on those hybrid servers with people escaping. So I feel like we really got to find a middle ground.
Yeah, I think with Splash, it was a very interesting thing because, I mean, that was before my crew started doing the multi-ship, multi-crew combat stuff. So our ship during Splash, we called the Blightbringer, and there were some fights that we got in where if we approached it the right way, whether we would orca and basically just attack from below or come down from above and just get a bunch of direct hits right then and there were fights that we had with top tier ships that would last less than a minute because there was enough splash damage and enough cannon fire coming off of the front of that thing that it would drop out of the sky. We would do so much just collateral damage across the board for the opposite ship that the advantages that any small crew would conceivably have with things like splash damage were basically negated. When it comes to overall PvP balance and how difficult it should be to sink a ship, it's a very trying to think. It is a very difficult question to try to answer because there's not really an easy way, at least in my mind, that you could bring that balance where, say, a tier 3 ship that has cannons on it and a crew that's willing to man them would still stand a chance against a competent crew in a tier 4 ship.
I'm excited to see what future features are going to bring to the viability of a lot of PvP ships, such as Overheat.
I'm actually really, I'm looking forward to Overheat, and not just that. I actually want to go back because you brought it up, and it's part of that thing of lowering the DPS. Much as Doc said, that reviver is really important. It's a person, and that person matters so much. And let's say, hypothetically, that you have, we'll go back to the 4 again. You get 4 people that you can have registered to your ship. Sure, you could bring 10. All right, cool. Those people aren't registered, therefore it takes them longer to man a cannon. Then they have to ideally decide, do I ever leave this cannon and have to then sit there, wait to get back on it? It becomes a choice. If you lower the amount of people that are really truly registered to the ship, you lower the DPS. And if you have the damage upped on the cannons, you have fewer cannons likely firing at the target. And I know that it was brought up about ships being able to get away and all of that. I actually think that's a good thing because if your ship is tied to so much for guys who have no bank ship, have no alts, have no other accounts, me, guys like me, our ship is everything. If we lose it, that is it. We are done. We are gone. That is the whole deal. If I'm able to limp away, I'm a little more okay with PvP combat because I didn't lose everything. Yeah, I took some hits. It sucked, but I got away. If I can just get outright destroyed, and I'm not advocating for being able to fight against one man against 6 ships. That's not what I'm saying here. But one ship chasing me down, I'd like a chance to get away. And if there's only so many guns that can be firing at me at once, I've got a better shot at getting away.
So I think Snappy brought up a good point. He runs multi ships in combat now, right? Which is what, if there were a lot of people playing, we would see a ton of. And when we talk about how difficult should a ship be to sink, a lot of us think 1v1 balance simply because we usually run into one other ship and you fight it out like in a duel. But the game changes completely if you're fighting 3v3, right? Then you have 3 ships worth of firepower. And it's like, okay, do we balance the game around these kind of alliance wars where it's very possible for maybe this lower damage to maybe do enough damage because there's, those ships could focus fire one target? Or do we still feel like the damage is not high enough? And I don't actually know the answer to that.
So I think part of it too is
Hold on one second, Snappy. I'd really
Sure.
want to hear from Shade on this, considering he's the other
Yeah.
solo more or less solo player.
Thanks. What I was actually going to say is, I believe game designer Luke mentioned on one of the podcasts or on stream that he doesn't like that one of the most often given pieces of advice is don't get attached to your ship. And he wanted players to be able to invest more in their ships and have more battles end with not being sunk. Which happens a lot when you've got two top tier crews or higher tier crews, facing off against one another. Usually they pound on each other for a while and then somebody gives up and gets away. And sometimes they argue about who won and who didn't. But I personally feel that sinking the ship shouldn't necessarily be the end goal of all PvP.
See, that whole don't get attached to your ship thing, I couldn't disagree with that statement more. I think don't get attached to your ship is very valid. Having your ship sunk is just something that normally happens. It's not that hard to rebuild.
No, I don't disagree. I think more the point was they would prefer that players felt safer investing more time and energy in their ship. And part of that is making sure in some way that it's easier for people to escape a battle once they've decided they no longer want to participate. And you see that now. I mean, you see top-tier PvP crews salvaging off their own cannons just to get another couple of knots to get away from an aggressor.
But where does that leave me as a PvPer? Do I want people to be able to get away from me easier?
So
No, I want to take their ship. I want to take everything on it. And if I have reason, I want to sink it.
Right. So I want to draw a couple things together, because on that note, Harms, there's a lot of motivation right now for PvP crews to attack pretty much anybody, particularly solo players or small group non-combative players that have reached tier 4. So to me, the question of balance is really like when you ask how long should it take to sink a ship, it's for me, the ideal fight should be 45 minutes to an hour roundabouts, sometimes approaching an hour 30 if it's a really, really good fight. But that's assuming that there's a fight, right? So how long should it take for somebody, because we have a lot of motivation to attack anybody, and we have a lot to gain from attacking people that don't use cannons, because to a large degree, we can keep their own ship up, even if they decide to core it. We can, if we have a small window of opportunity, a lot of times we can repair the core at the very least just to be able to get into another box, just get that one other box, or something like that, right? So there's a lot to gain from attacking people, from sinking people and taking their stuff on the way down. Should it be as easy as it is? I don't think so.
Easy as it is for what? Sorry, I lost track of.
To be able to sink and steal from literally anybody. I mean, because unless you are a combat player, unless you are a PvPer, the odds that you're going to be able to get something out of that ship are extremely high.
Yeah, I think that's partially solved by the new servers.
Yeah. I mean, it means that it's localized. It means that when it happens, it's going to happen in one area, and it decreases the chance that any given login is going to make that happen. But at the same time, when it does, how do we draw that fight out a little bit more? How do we give more opportunities for people to get away? How do we give more opportunities for people to escape?
I think that's why they dialed back the splash damage, actually.
I think that's why they did it too. I just think that they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, especially with this change. They're not, as far as we know, they're not changing the sand wall for these hybrid servers.
Which is why I would like to talk about, should walls be made even more difficult than they are now, to an extent that would require, I guess, uh, a, a much larger group of people to be able to properly take care of everything while going through a wall in
Yeah,
order
it
to
might
make it
kill
through.
solo players. That's the biggest issue with that.
Yeah, one problem I have with it is we have the issue of the hybrid server and people running through the wall when they're about to die. Like, oh no, I'm going to get through the wall. Well, if the wall is what kills them, there goes my loot.
Well,
Like, there's no way for me to get it.
To be
here's
honest with you, Harms, if I were to run into you and that was your thing and it was you, you aren't getting my loot anyway because I'll core my ship before you ever board me.
That will not stop me.
we will save your ship before you can drop it to the abyss.
Yeah, it's a long fall down. I mean, it is a valid tactic. It's definitely a valid thing to try if that's the way that you want to play and you want to prevent other people from getting your loot, because it does work sometimes. But like a lot of the people that are in the fighting mood will chase that down, and they will do everything that they can in the moment to keep that up.
Real quick, this is a dual question for Grave and for Shade, and that is, being solo players and with the fact that World Adrift is an MMO, would it be like kind of against your code to ask for some help to group up together, similar like going through a dungeon,
Not at all.
to get through the sand wall, and then once you're there on the other side, you split ways?
No, I'm not a purist at all. In fact, I typically, following some role models that I had early on in the game, I tend to collect solo players, and we'll wolf pack at times when certain subset of us can be on, just for safety. And when it comes time to get through a wall, we'll pool our resources, build one ship that'll work, and then get through a wall and split up again so that we don't have all those revivers on one ship, so that we can log in our own ships and not feel like we're endangering someone else's work. I highly recommend that kind of play to any solo player. Going through on your own is really difficult, and there's no way the game is going to be balanced in such a way that it's ever going to be anything other than really difficult.
And to echo Shade, because I know you also asked me. No, it's not against my code or anything. I don't really have a code, so to speak. My solo play stems from the idea that I don't want to log on one day and have someone go, guess what? There's not a ship anymore because I decided to log on and it's gone now. Like that's why I've never lost a ship, and it's because I don't have people attached to my ship who log on and then I come on and they go, so about the ship, that doesn't happen. And I do team up with players. I wolf pack, like you said. The other day, I played. I had a great experience. I played for 5-ish hours. I found somebody in Discord. Actually, they came into the chat randomly. They said, "What server you play on?" I said, "Durat." Okay, so he was stuck on the other side of the map. He he didn't have anything because he was playing on PTS, and he was like, "I'm just going to get rid of this piece of crap ship, and I'm going to drop it." He gets rid of it. He random respawns. No, I'm sorry, he didn't random respawn. He came. We made a group so he could beacon to me. I soloed out of the storm wall into tier 2. He beaconed to me. Well, he beaconed to an island near me. We put a reviver on my ship to get him somewhere, got him some materials, and then I helped him rebuild his ship. We didn't see a single other player. There's no combat, nothing like that happened. I got pure joy out of just helping him. And I was fine with that. I didn't mind that one bit. And when it was all said and done, we put his reviver on that ship off of mine, and he was good to go.
Snappy or Harms or Doc, anything you wanted to add to this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I on occasion, I'll play exactly the same way. One of the some of the most valuable moments that I think I've drawn from Worlds Adrift have been at times where the rest of the crew may have logged off or may just not be around. So I'll I'll boot up an alt or something like that, start out on a tier 1 or a tier 2 island, just random respawn a couple times, and if I see a ship, I'll like hop onto their ship and ask like, where are we going? And essentially kind of like put my foot down as like part of their crew. Like I'm with you guys now.
I always tell them
And
to get off my ship.
yeah. But yeah, like the spontaneous interactions like that, where you're solo, and it may be another person that's solo, or just a pair of people that are starting out the game, or just doing their own thing or whatever, and just like meeting in game in that very authentic way. Can be super powerful, but it's not the kind of thing where you build, the sort of bond. Maybe it ends up developing into that, but it's not the kind of thing where right away you have this bond where it's just like we're crew now. It's like we're crew until we part ways, and that's I think there's a lot of beauty in that, and it's definitely something worth doing, and it's a huge part of the game because there are a lot of people that do that, whether it's because of choice, or whether it's because of lack of trust of people, or because it's there are not currently the social tools that really uh, allow a whole lot of communication beyond that, unless you go outside of the game.
And you're right about the social tools. Those are lacking, and that's its own monster. But I'm looking forward to the hybrid server in that I think a lot of those moments, those more peaceful moments where people can interact and learn each other, are something we need more of, and we'll have chances for that because it's good when it happens. And with right now, the way things are right now, there's no trust. You see another player as a solo player. The mentality is there's somebody at that island. I guess I'm not going to that island now. And you hear engines in the distance. You go, I should hide. I should do something. I should get away. And you'll never know if that person was violent, and there might be a chance that they were, and you'd rather not risk it. And that's how you don't lose a ship. You go, I hear something, I'm leaving.
What
Well,
would you do if you did lose a ship?
Ship, as a man who has no bank ship, because I was going to ask you this, Harms. You were talking about that you think losing ships is good. If you lost a ship right now, if you lost your ship, how fast would you be back in the air? Like, you've got a bank ship and everything. How fast are you back in the air with an equivalent, better, or even slightly less good ship?
Couple hours with my bank. Without a bank, couple hours.
so one of the things that it frequently comes up for me, kind of at a meta level for the game here, is that this is a social game, and I may just be an old fool who's got so many hours that I really don't care. I know how easy it is to get stuff back, and it's not an unenjoyable process at this point. But I would actually rather get to know somebody else in game than I would keep a ship, depending on the ship. And I've benefited more from that attitude over the last year of playing this game than I have from fearfully keeping my ship from being in danger. That's
So
it's a play choice.
See, aside from pirating, I also like to make very fun ships. And I never make them because, oh, I need to hold on to the ship and, I can't lose it. I make them, I lose them, I make a new one. That's just me.
So I think this we've kind of segued into our next topic intentionally, is that we're talking about ways that PvP players and PvE players interact together, and what would be the best way to go about this, because it is impossible for everyone to like every single element of the game, but we want everyone to have as much fun as they can in this big airship sandbox. And in my opinion, I would love if there were kind of ways like Eve does it a little, or Albion Online did it, that you can get these players to interact in productive ways. Like, for instance, maybe the PvE players who love trading or exploring, maybe there's a really rare resource that spawns on islands. And us PvPers, we spend most of our time pirating. But if in some of the PvE zones, those who explore a lot get larger quantities of this rare resource, whatever it is, then maybe the PvP players need that. Or vice versa, when we already have this, is that if the PvP players are going to spend most of their time in Tier 4, then we get to interact with the PvE players because we can bring those schematics back and sell them, and that starts trade. Or they can risk it themselves, and that gives us targets to pirate, where at the same time it gives them a chance for mass profit. And I want to hear your guys' ideas to really get these interactions going, because I think that's how you really build this awesome sandbox universe where everyone has their own role and thing they like to do.
I think the problem right now is profit isn't really that much of a thing. Having a ton of resources isn't all that effective on my overall gameplay. I think we actually need economy in order for that to really work.
To make an economy, you have to look at it in a few ways. There's one, I think probably the most brilliant and silly example of a player-made economy attaching a value to a thing that honestly had none was Diablo 2 and the Stone of Jordan, and people attaching value to these dumb rings and going, well, you want a shaft stop? Well, it's like 7 SOJs, depending on the economy that day or who you're talking to, and just trading these dumb rings around that we had no other value for than just trading more and more of these dumb rings around. And if you were going to do that, much like Doc said, if there were a resource that is going to more likely be found by explorers than it is by PvPers just by time investment. It's an interesting concept, though nothing prevents PvPers from going in and getting it themselves. That it would have to be a very concerted effort on PvPers' part to just go, yeah, there's 7 of us, and not a single one of us is going to go do that. And I don't know that would be the answer, but attaching an economy would be interesting if, say, there was a way to cause a schematic or something that matters, which the PvE side, the exploration side, let's call it the exploration side, if they had access to quicker, more easily, or better than people who spent their entire time in the air just plundering their loot rather than finding it.
There's also this whole problem right now with the player base and the fact that the way people act isn't necessarily how they would act if there were 10,000 people online. Right now, if I see someone I'm pirating, there's no question about it. It doesn't matter what ship you're in. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't even matter if you're a friend. We're going to fight because we're both here and that's all we've got. But if there are 10,000 people on a server and I was running into fights left and right, sure, I'll take a break and go hang out with some people just to have some other kind of fun. But it's really hard to determine what would set that off in the current climate.
The other thing about the items coming into play is that I think it would be absolutely necessary to have sort of opposing items for these two different playstyles. So PvPers would be rewarded for doing certain things in those PvP areas, or be rewarded for engaging in PvP combat. And then PvEers would be rewarded for, that.
So I think they're sort of moving in this direction, but they're just not very close. So on the PvE side, they have these Atlas Compass side quests. And they said those have a specific loot table that is not on any other loot table. And now it sounds like that's going to be cosmetic, but it'd be cool if if they got something, if that's something PvE players are mostly going to get, right? It's not that I won't, as a PvP player, do some of that PvE content and want to go on those treasure hunts, but I'm not going to do it nearly as much as a PvE player would. Vice versa, I would love to see PvP territory control give the PvP players their late game goal, and then you have this. Then you both have something you're kind of gaining that the other side really doesn't gain much value from. But it also allows them to interact. Like, let's say I am a PvE player, but I join this alliance that owns territory, so that way I can farm in T4 because I love trading cool clothes, right? And we have a skyport in T4 that I could use as a little mini safe zone to farm from. Like, I think the impact of that is so huge. We just need these end game gameplay loops and systems in the game.
So it would be really, really cool if there were some way to be able to make it a dynamic kind of thing where the kind of the meta play style, it sort of dictates what you get from it, right? So if we were to incorporate things like rewards being schematic roles or something like that for PvP players, like, we're after, a few different things, and like after overheats in, like, obviously that's going to be one of the things that we really, really want is overheat, because we still want to pack our engines in tight. We still want to have as much power as possible. We'll figure out how to shell it off and defend it, and get the resilience down to a level where it's doable in conjunction with excessive power and enough overheat to make it viable. Whereas, with somebody who is an explorer, particularly if they're exploring in tier 4 areas, is going to really want like fuel efficiency. And who knows what else, like, whether they, if they change up the stats at some point, like being able to sort of change the reward system based on the way that people are playing in that time, and really create the game in a way that it accentuates the sort of emergent gameplay that develops in the game would be really awesome.
Yeah.
On the note of economy, I think that cosmetics are going to be huge, like really, really huge. Like right now, I would trade anything, pretty much any amount that we have in a bank. I would farm it up. I would do whatever I need to do if someone were to offer me one of the bandit hats. Like that would be that's
Wait,
what I
You mean
that's
the
what I
Bloodborne
want.
hat that I have?
Yeah.
wait, the one with the horns.
No,
The
not the.
bounty hunter
I have
hat.
the one with the horns. I think I
The,
gave it to
the bounty hunter hat, that one.
the
Yeah.
bounty hunter hat. Yeah, yeah. That's the like that. I really, really want that. And there are, other people. There are players that certainly don't care about it at all. People people like Vexus that go around with the basic starter set of clothing in all black or whatever that you start with, and that's just like your thing or whatever. But like to a lot of players, PvPers included, like cosmetics are a big thing. Like we care about that. So if there were a way to, make that very much uh, an economic sort of thing where it was worth really trading for those kinds of things, and I think that being able to um, create your own color schemes and things like that is going to do a lot. Where
I
maybe
totally agree.
when you
Imagine
find it, right, you find that item and you can make that item, but to be able to stain it another color and be able to create something unique, that's going to be what like brings in the value.
now, imagine just an idea here. What if creating top tier engines was a game in itself? What if that was like someone's job within the game? Like to create the highest tier engines, to create these great engines, instead of an RNG role, it's something you need to work towards. And
You
then
mean you mean similar to like specs?
yeah, to be able to just like build your character up in a way that they create some amazing engines,
That
then
goes.
sell those to PvPers. PvPers don't want to sit there farming all the stuff for that. They don't want to, have to roll their character in a specific way. Things like that, I can imagine bridging an amazing gap.
So this is the old World of Warcraft player in me talking, and so I way back in the day I rolled with a crew of guys who were High Warlord, and if anybody out there played Vanilla WoW and knows about High Warlord or Grand Marshal, any of that, they know basically what that did to somebody's life. You sacrificed everything to do that. In that vein, those guys who PvP'd day in, day out, they still made time to do certain PvE content because there was stuff to be gained from that, which bolstered their PvP. And when you say that PvPers don't want to farm that, yeah, but there are those guys that want to min-max so hard, they will. Never underestimate somebody's power to poop sock, because they will.
That's very true. It is very
And
true. Me personally, though, I would much rather just, pay for something than roll that character myself and roll those engines and all that stuff. Kind of like Albion Online, if you guys have ever played it.
The guild
gets brought up a
craft.
lot.
It's there's multiple things you can do. But if you're strictly into PvP, then, learning woodcrafting and stuff, it's an entire investment on its own. Like, it's hard to be both.
Shade.
So this is a slight departure from where the topic has gone, but it's what I was thinking about when the topic was introduced. And that is that PvE players versus PvP players it can be summed up as basically farmers and fighters. It's not a hard definition, but if you look at something like Ann's gas station, I don't know if you guys were around when that got started. That's essentially someone who is a PvE player saying I can farm something of value to the PvP guys, and they'll come and bring me the stuff that I don't have the skill to go get. That's literally how she made the decision to start the store, and it began one of the largest trading networks that we've seen for a while. There's plenty of creative opportunities for these play styles to coexist on the hybrid server or on the PvP server. It's part of what makes the MMO, the open world, valuable to me. It does take some creativity, but it can be done.
Yeah, I think that we really and the idea of the only thing we have to be careful of, and with anything sort of specializing, especially Albion style specializing, as much as they did a lot of things right in that game, what that did is it made it so like you're like, okay, you're the guild crafter bitch, and you got to grind so hard to get that good stuff for your guild, and that's what would happen in this game if that's how it would. You have your engine guy for your guild, and God forbid the engine guy leaves and you can't get your engines back. And it also really punishes solo players and smaller groups who can't afford to specialize in all the ways you need. So I'd be a little reticent to do that, but I do love the idea of having like cool cosmetics that mostly the PvE players are going to find, and cool dyes that mostly the PvE guys are going to find. And then I'm like, hell yeah, I'll go get you Skycore Circuitry Network. Let me go shoot down some guys, go to T4 for you, come back, now give me my purple hat. Like, I love that. And I think, and it would, I kind of brought the topic full circle here. So I think also now is a good time to maybe talk about some unique things you've done in Worlds Adrift that aren't PvP, because so many of us here are diehard PvPers and we're on every podcast, and we don't spend a lot of time talking about things we do besides PvP. So, one at a time, guys, we can talk about how things we do that, aren't PvP at all that we've really enjoyed.
Doc, to start with you.
Sure. So I created this funny mini game called Grapple Splat. We called it in Freeport Vela. And I basically made using the deck pieces, and I used different color metals, made a game board and put fences up so that you had certain areas that you had to land in, kind of like playing skee ball, but with your character. And so you'd swing off somebody's ship and try to land on this derelict game board ship and score different point values. And then if you got to the whatever point value we set as winning, you blew the horn and you won. And we played it all day because, there was helm bugs. We couldn't fly our ships. And it was a lot of fun.
Oh man, why wasn't I invited to that? That sounds awesome.
I have the schematic. We can remake it after the podcast.
Because you would just blow them up and loot them.
It's possible.
What about you, Grave? Wait. Yeah.
So who here has been to Hell Maze?
I have.
Same.
Yep.
So is Harms, by the way.
Harms?
Yeah,
Yes,
pretty sure.
yes.
Pretty sure everybody's probably explored the whole map over multiple times in this group.
So I want to tell you a story about Hell Maze. When I first came in the game, I played for about a day, and by day I mean 4 6 hours or so, just straight, just nonstop playing. Didn't get up, go to the bathroom or anything. Didn't really get a lot done. I mean, I got a lot of farming done. I fooled around with the shipbuilder a little bit, but ultimately didn't get a lot done. Next day, I came on. I made a ship. I got to another island, and this guy and his buddy see me, and they go, "Hey, we want to cross the storm wall, and there's only two of us. We need somebody else to help repair." And I said, "Okay." So they said, "Get rid of your ship, salvage it, take all the mats, come with us." And so I did. And sure enough, within the next 20 minutes, I was in tier 4. I went from tier 1 to tier 4 like that, not even knowing what I was doing. And when they left, and this is actually coming back to people logging on to your ship and all of that, uh, the guy who was the captain of that ship, the owner of it, he sends me a message on Steam and says, "I'm going into active duty tomorrow. The ship is yours. Spoiler alert: there's no fuel and there are no sails. Have fun." And this is
That's so good.
yeah, I don't count this as me losing a ship because it wasn't my ship. I cored that ship so that nobody would have the loot, and I ended up in tier 3. I ended up on Hellmaze, actually. I lived on Hellmaze for about 2 days, gathering mats. I made my ship, and then I was stuck in tier 3. I was in what was it, I-1 or whatever for probably a week and a half. Couldn't leave it because I couldn't find a compass. Without a compass, I couldn't cross the storm wall. And so there I was, just exploring every single island. And because the population had dropped, I was pretty unmolested, actually. I went a long time without seeing anybody except a guy named Jacob who kept showing up wherever I went. Jacob was everywhere. I don't know his last name. He had a last name. I always remember just Jacob. When I finally got back into tier 4, there was Jacob again. Dude, he was everywhere. This Jacob guy just everywhere. And that experience was really fun to me because one, I wasn't being shelled on relentlessly, and two, this friendly dude just kept turning up wherever I went. Any different days, he would just turn up.
One of my favorite things to do is a game I appropriated from a friend of mine, a guy I met way back last summer who I still play with as often as I can. It's called Pistol Peekaboo. It's a little harder now that you can't shoot through a shipyard, but basically, it's one of the ways that I have of helping new players learn how to play the game. New players usually do not have a whole lot of situational awareness. They don't know how other people can sneak around to get advantage, and I'm kind of a habitual sneaker. So I'll hide someplace in their shipyard bubble, watch, see what their patterns are, get in, hide someplace, and then just shoot them once and watch them run around and try and find me. And then when they start settling down, I'll shoot them again. The goal isn't to kill them and get their stuff. The goal is to say, hey, look, this is a dangerous world. You need to start developing some habits that are going to serve you well rather than the habits you have, which are not serving you.
I love it.
And it's, I used to be a teacher for a living, and it's one thing to say, well, you need to learn how to do this. I'm going to kill you as a lesson. And it's another to point out that there is a lesson they need to learn and then help them learn it. Call me a Care Bear if you want, but especially during these low population times when there's a lot of new people in the game who don't have any idea how dangerous it can be when the population is up. I found it a really interesting way of interacting with people.
That's great.
One of my favorite things is just as much as I love to destroy stuff and blow things up, I also really like creating, and shipbuilding is one of the main things that brought me to this game. I have made some of the wackiest looking ships. I have made some of the fanciest looking ships. I have made completely useless ships and incredible PvP ships, but I do CAD drafting for a living. Creating is something that's always been ingrained in me. I have over 700 hours in Arc, mostly all base building. It's always been fun to me. Shipbuilding 2.0 is going to bring a whole new level to this game.
Snappy.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, man. There's a lot. I mean, I feel like pretty much everybody's probably kind of created their own like little mini games and things like that to do just to have fun in the moment, like things that just develop spontaneously, and that's really cool. But I think probably one of the most meaningful things that I think I've done so far in Worlds Adrift that doesn't, at least it doesn't inherently involve PvP. That's not to say that we didn't fight people, but the first Cinevis island that I ever found um, was in. I'm trying to remember what it was called on the old map back in 0.1.3 and 1.4. It was the one to the east. It was the Galaxy Island. All right, it's the one that I think it's called Milky Way now on this map. And it was something where like I explored that island. I landed a ship there. I was solo at the time, and I just walked across it or grappled across it because you can't really walk straight across the whole thing. But I explored that thing like every inch of it, up and down. Found the little secret room, and found a tablet inside of that secret room, and it had a drawing on it. And I looked at that drawing and I stared at it and I was like, somebody put this here. Like somebody literally made this for a reason. Like they drew this, they made this picture to tell me something. And when you looked at it, it told you the story of like how to find a secret hidden chest. And so I went back out of that room and I explored the island and I ended up finding it. And there was a secret golden chest. And I was just like how much thought does it take to make an island like this, to make something that cool? And from that point on, like I explored, a whole bunch of islands. But the name that was most consistent, the one that I felt was, like really like, holy, this person's really putting a lot of effort into this. This person has something to say, was Cinevis. And so last, I think it was December, um, James Canada and I did a Snappy Canada tour where we spent 2 days on stream. Both streams were about 8 hours, and we went to every single Cinevis island in the game, and just did that. Like if we found people along the way, like we might shoot at them, we might fight them, or what have you. But the goal of that was to hit every single Cinevis island and just see like what every island had to offer. And that going through that and kind of hearing, because that was the point to me where it was like, man, like these islands tell stories, right? These are players telling stories with their ability to create for the game for other players to experience. And it was pretty mind-blowing, honestly, when I think about it. It was a really wild trip.
First time I found out that the islands were created by players blew my mind.
Yeah, I think I would totally agree with that. The amount of work that goes into so many of the islands, and for secrets, and it's like, if you like, when you actually pay attention to the writings on the wall, like they'll tell you where the chests are. It's knowledge for some islands, and that's just so cool. And it got me to really pay attention to how much work they put into it. And I think that's probably one of the best parts of the game for me.
Aside from the island creator and way too many hours on shipbuilding, one of my favorite things to do is hop onto an alt, go to a random island, and roleplay. So one time, I know this is kind of PvP oriented, this first one. One time I convinced these two people that I was the lord of the island, that the only way that they could get off is if they built ships right next to each other and then duked it out. And whoever won would have to join the other person's crew as like their first mate for the next week.
Now that's creating content.
It's really good, man.
I also spent a while grappled under a bridge, and whenever people would come by, I would hop back up onto the bridge and tell them they could not pass. And if they tried to pass, I would kill them.
You troll.
And then they would respawn, and eventually they would have to solve my riddle in order to pass through the bridge.
Player interaction.
That's really
Just
good.
fun.
I'm like smiling so big right now just thinking about like everything that everybody has said. Like these are
And
I don't know,
another
I feel-
thing, real quick, is as a crew, we went around and to a bunch of islands in the Tier 1 zone when there were still a whole bunch of players. And we would drop down in like a group to whoever was building a ship. And we would gift them a Tier 3 engine, Tier 4 wing, or the opposite, and a Skycore upgrade.
It's funny how many people didn't trust us.
Yeah. So that was...
We got shot a couple times doing that.
Yeah. Anyway,
Oh.
I think that's all the time we have for this podcast episode. Thank you to everyone for listening in. And please let us know down in the comments if you would like to have any topics talked about on the next episode. And please like, comment, and subscribe, right? Is that how they say it?
Smash
No.
that follow button.
There you go.
Yeah,
Take care, guys.
I guess if we're gonna go ahead and close, I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. I really felt like this episode it was very different. In a lot of ways, it was a little bit more impromptu than kind of what we've laid out for ourselves so far. But it was I think it was very, very authentic, and being able to have kind of other voices like Shade and Grave, like y'all. This is the first episode that you guys have been on. Being able to hear your perspectives and talk about your perspectives versus our perspectives and vice versa has been really cool. I also want to say thank you to Bossa. It was really, really nice hearing you talk about this podcast and being able to know that the studio, you guys are listening, and you spent like a pretty solid chunk of time talking about it too, and addressing some of the questions that we had asked. That was really cool.
Now you're
Absolutely.
committed, Bossa. You have to address us every time now. That's the rule.
Yeah.
With the boss mention there, I did want to point out that we're not necessarily trying to call boss out on anything, but if it's if it feels that way, it's just our criticism, and it's always attempted to be constructive.
We're passionate as hell.
We are.
Also, I would like to shout out specifically to Bossa Julia for being awesome and withstanding the sometimes rage of the community at times.
The absolute barrage.
I'm not
You-
gonna stop.
The fact that you still put up with that, props.
And I also want to thank Grave and Shade for coming in today. Absolutely awesome. I may not understand you, but God damn it, I respect you.